CBS The Young and the Restless spoilers. When news broke that Kyle and Claire were planning a surprise wedding in Paris, the reaction was swift and loud, but no one's fury matched that of Audra. What should have been a romantic escape for two people ready to put their complicated pasts behind them instead triggered a storm of rage within a woman who had always seen Claire, not only as a threat, but as a symbol of everything she had lost. Audra's carefully constructed persona of elegance and control shattered in private the moment she heard the news. Her clenched jaw, trembling hands, and the glass of wine she hurled against the wall all revealed what her public image never would. She was utterly undone. The wedding wasn't just about Claire, and Kyle was about the humiliation Audra couldn't bear. Claire had one, and Audra was being left behind once again. That night, alone in her penthouse with her pride bruised and her emotions boiling over, Audra didn't cry. She schemed. Destruction was the only answer. If she couldn't have Kyle, she would make sure Claire didn't either. But Audra wasn't impulsive. She was a strategist, a woman who understood that every takedown needed precision. To dismantle Claire, she needed something sharp, intimate, and undeniable. She needed Claire's weakness. But as much as she searched, nothing surfaced. Claire Grace Newman had scrubbed her past cleaner than anyone Audra had ever tried to target. There were whispers of coarse rumors of psychological instability, a mysterious childhood, and a brief disappearance from the public eye, but none of it could be verified. Every journalist she hired, every investigator she bribed, came back empty-handed or terrified. It was as if Claire had been reborn the day she arrived in Genoa City, and everything before that was locked away in a vault. Audra wasn't just angry anymore, was obsessed. She needed leverage, and without it, she had no power. But then a single name began to echo in her mind. Jordan, the infamous woman whose manipulation of Claire had once shocked the entire Newman family. The woman presumed dead, lost in a fire, or on the run, depending on who you asked. But Audra didn't believe in clean deaths, not in this world. And the more she dug, the more she became convinced that Jordan was still alive. She had simply gone underground, watching, waiting, and planning just like Audra herself. And if there was anyone in the world who knew how to destroy Claire from the inside out, it was Jordan. The idea was dangerous, maybe even suicidal, but Audra couldn't let that stop her. She made contact through encrypted channels, following whispers through dark corners of the web, paying informants who didn't even give their real names. Days passed, and then weeks. But eventually, a response came. It wasn't warm. It wasn't even polite. But it was clear. Jordan would speak. The meeting point was nice. France, far enough from Paris to avoid scrutiny, but close enough to stage a silent war. Audra packed her bags and flew across the ocean with the weight of revenge burning like fire in her veins. When she met Jordan in a shadowy alley near the Promenade d'Anglais, it was like staring into a void. The woman hadn't aged so much as transformed. Whatever ghost of humanity Jordan once possessed had long since evaporated. She was sharp, cold, and terrifyingly lucid. But more than anything, she was angry at Claire. She didn't need Audra to explain the plan. She already had one of her own. Claire had betrayed her. Claire had run. Claire had chosen the Newmans and Kyle and redemption, and now she would pay the price. They didn't shake hands. They didn't even smile. But they had an understanding. Claire wouldn't be walking down any island Paris. The plan came together in silence. Jordan was a master of surveillance and psychological warfare, and Audra was the perfect accomplice, stylish, wealthy, and invisible in all the right social circles. They watched Claire from afar, tracked her movements, analyzed her routines. Claire and Kyle had arrived in Paris for what was supposed to be a secretive pre-wedding getaway, with only a handful of trusted people aware of the ceremony. But the moment they arrived in Nice for a romantic detergence, the two of them, before the chaos of family descended it, became clear that the window was opening. Jordan had a safe house, a place no one would ever look. Audra handled the logistics, the cover story, and the bribery. Claire never stood a chance. One moment, she was strolling along the French Riviera in the early evening light. The next, she was gone. Kyle's reaction was nuclear. When he realized Claire was missing, his world shattered. He stormed through hotels, shouted at police officers, threatened to call in every Newman resource at his disposal. He blamed himself, thinking maybe the sudden trip, the secrecy, had made her panic. But as the hours passed and no contact came, his desperation turned to terror. By the next morning, the Newmans were mobilized and the media was sniffing around. But all eyes quickly turned to one woman, Audra. She wasn't subtle. She'd posted cryptic social media messages, dropped hints in the press about fairy tale weddings that never last, and been spotted in Europe by more than one source. It didn't take long before Kyle's grief turned to suspicion. But there was no proof, nothing concrete, just shadows and conjecture, and Audra had always known how to play in the gray. But even as suspicion mounted, no one suspected the truth. Jordan was alive. And she wasn't just Alavesh, was orchestrating something far more sinister than a simple abduction. In that hidden room in the outskirts of Nice, Claire awoke disoriented. The surroundings were sterile, but not violent. There were no chains, no shouting, no overt cruelty. But the psychological trap had already been set. Jordan didn't want to hurt Claire physically. She wanted to undo her. Every hour, she whispered pieces of the past truths, lies, half-memoristas in to unravel the careful mental scaffolding Claire had built for herself. She spoke of Claire's childhood, of experiments, of broken identities and shifting names. She claimed Claire had never truly left her, that everything Claire was now was built on a foundation of Lisa and Jordan held the blueprints. Meanwhile, back in Paris, Kyle was losing control. The Newmans were demanding answers, security teams were combing the region, and still no Claire. And Audra, she played the game with frightening elegance. She cried for the cameras, acted shocked when questioned, and offered to assist in any way. But beneath the surface, the cracks were starting to show. Jordan wasn't updating her anymore. The plan they had forged together was no longer under her control. Audra had opened a door she could no longer close. The monster she had summoned was now acting with its own agenda, and Audra feared, for the first time, that she might become collateral damage. Because Jordan didn't care about revenge in the abstract. She wanted to own Claire again, to possess her, to break her. And once she had, she'd decide what to do with her. Audra had just been the means. But nothing stays hidden forever. A local shopkeeper remembered Claire. A camera caught her reflection. A digital footprint was traced. And when Kyle finally got the lead he needed, he didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for permission or backup. He went alone. What he found was not a crime scene, but something more disturbing. Claire, sitting in silence, pale, shaken, and unsure of what was real. Jordan had vanished, leaving behind nothing but echoes and questions. And Claire? She wasn't the same woman who'd walked the streets of Nice 2 days ago. She had seen something, heard something, remembered something that now lived behind her eyes like a ghost. The wedding was postponed. Of course. The Newmans circled their wagons. Audra was cornered in Genoa City, her smirk slowly fading as authorities closed in. But again, no proof, no fingerprints, no trail. She was slippery, and Kyle knew that. But he also knew she had made one fatal mistake, trusting Jordan. And now, the question everyone feared to ask was rising to the surface. What exactly had Jordan done to Claire? Was this just revenge? Or was it something deeper, darker, something rooted in experiments, identity theft, brainwashing, things only whispered about in the most classified of Newman files? Whatever it was, Claire wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. But she would, because Jordan wasn't finished. The game had just begun. Claire had always imagined that if her past ever caught up with her, she would face it with strength. She had worked so hard to become someone else, to build a new life, to love purely, and to believe, however naively, that her history had been buried deep enough never to resurface. But in that moment, standing in the dim, suffocating stillness of Jordan's hideaway in Nice, all illusion shattered. When the door creaked open and Jordan appeared very much alive, unscarred, and coldly composed, it was as if Claire's mind splintered into 1,000 shards. The air was thick with dread, and reality itself began to warp. Claire's body recoiled, her breath caught in her throat, and her knees gave way as her vision blurred with tears. She had fought so hard to escape this woman, to reclaim her identity, but now Jordan stood before her like a specter from hell, bringing with her all the darkness Claire had tried so desperately to suppress. And despite every survival instinct screaming at her to fight, Claire could only sob, collapsing into a desperate plea for her life, for her freedom, for love. She wept not just for herself, but for the future she feared was slipping away. "Please, let me go," she cried through broken sobs, her body trembling. "I want to marry Kyle. I want a normal life. I want peace. I'm not your pawn anymore. I don't want to hurt anyone ever again." But Jordan was unmoved. Her eyes, once capable of mimicking maternal care, were now vacant, devoid of empathy. She regarded Claire as one might a broken toyance useful, now infuriating in its defiance. And then, with a voice colder than ice, she uttered the words that would haunt Claire forever. "If you won't live with me, you'll die without me." There was no room for negotiation, no second chances. Jordan didn't see Claire as a Persanche saw her as property, something she had molded from pain, shaped with manipulation, and expected to obey without question. Jordan's cruelty was not theatrical. It was calculated. She didn't scream, didn't raise a hand. Her power was in her precision, the way she orchestrated fear like a symphony. She reminded Claire of the things they had done together, the secrets buried in blood and silence, the names of people who had vanished because of them. She twisted the past into a noose and hung it around Claire's neck. "You think you're innocent now," she whispered. "You think Kyle will still love you when he knows who you really are." It wasn't just a threat. It was a psychological invasion. Jordan didn't need to lay a hand on Claire to make her bleed. She just needed to remind her of the monster she had once been forced to become. Claire covered her ears, screamed for it to stop, but Jordan kept going, peeling away every layer of sanity with surgical precision. And in that darkness, Claire began to wonder, was she still the person she thought she had become, or had she only been pretending all along? Meanwhile, Audra waited, not in the shadows, but in a 5-star hotel just a few hours away, drinking champagne and pretending she wasn't consumed by anxiety. Her plan with Jordan had never been about murder. It had been about sabotage, public disgrace, and heartbreak knit death. But as hours turned into days, without a single update, unease began to rot her confidence. Jordan had promised results, had assured her that Claire would be taken care of, but now Audra wondered what that actually meant. She had never trusted Jordana in their right mind would, but she had underestimated the depth of her madness. And now, with Claire gone and Kyle on the verge of an emotional breakdown, the heat was rising. Audra was being watched, and she knew it. Kyle had people tailing her, and the press had picked up rumors about her sudden European vacation. The walls were closing in. But the true horror? Audra realized that she might have handed Claire over to a woman who intended to kill her. Back in the hideaway, Claire's psychological state was unraveling. She was hungry, sleep-deprived, and drowning in flashbacks. The boundaries between memory and hallucination began to blur. She saw herself as a child again, in the same room, with Jordan whispering promises of a better world. She saw Kyle's face morph into shadows. She heard wedding bells turn into screams. And just when she thought she might surrender completely, something inside her fluttered a flicker of resistance. Perhaps it was love, or survival, or pure defiance. But Claire stopped crying. She stared at Jordan with hollow eyes and asked, in a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, "Is this who you want me to become again?" Jordan was momentarily caught off guard. She hadn't expected resilience, not this late. But she recovered quickly, smiling with the calm of a woman who believed she had already won. "I made you," she said. You are mine. But Jordan had made one mistake. She underestimated the person Kyle had helped Claire become. Love wasn't Claire's weakness, it was her anchor. And in that final moment, as Jordan moved to sedate her again, Claire acted. She didn't attack in rage. She moved with precision, slipping from her bindings and striking with desperation born of fear and purpose. The scuffle was brief, brutal, and left both women injured. But Claire escaped. Bleeding, barefoot, and shaking, she ran into the night. It would be hours before she was found by local authorities. And by then, Jordan had vanished again. Another ghost, another rumor. But this time, there would be consequences. Because Claire wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a witness, and she was ready to talk. The plan had failed. Audra, now cornered, tried to spin the story, claiming she had been duped, that Jordan had betrayed them both. But it was too late. Evidence was mounting. Travel records, encrypted messages, witnesses. Her polished facade began to crack, and she realized too late that aligning with a sociopath was never going to be a temporary arrangement. Audra had blood on her hands, even if she didn't pull the trigger or inject the poison. And now, she was alone. Kyle wanted nothing to do with her. The Newmans had closed ranks, and Claire, bruised but alive, was preparing to tell the world what really happened. But this wasn't the end. Jordan was still out there, watching, waiting. Her obsession with Claire hadn't faded, it had evolved. She didn't see the escape as a failure. She saw it as the next chapter, and Claire knew that too. Her life with Kyle would never be normal again, not with this kind of evil lingering in the shadows. But she was done running. She would fight. She would speak. And if Jordan came back, Claire would be readying it as a victim, not as a project, but as a woman who had finally taken back her identity. And so, as the storm clouds gathered once more over Genoa City, one truth became clear: the war for Claire's soul had only just begun.